Welcome back to the 2022 DoD Cloud Exchange. My name is Jared Serbu. I'm the deputy editor here at Federal News Network, and I'll be moderating this session. And for the next 45 minutes or so, we're very glad to have with us Miss Renata Spinks. She wears two hats for the Marine Corps, both of which are super important to the DoD Cloud conversation. She's both the Marine Corps CISO and the Assistant Director for C4. Going to talk with us about some of the ways in which the Marines are trailblazers on DoD's path toward the cloud and some of the challenges the service still has on its own journey. Ms. Spinks, welcome. Thanks for taking the time for us today. Really appreciate you being here.
Thanks so much for having us here. I really appreciate it. I'm looking forward to the dialogue.
Same here. And let's start out at really a very high level. Talk about where the Marine Corps is on your cloud journey, both from the strategic perspective that you've put in place, but also some of the accomplishments that you've seen grow out of that strategy so far.
I tell you, my favorite word is strategy. Everything starts with strategy. We have so many problem sets and complexities all throughout the Department of Defense. And the Marine Corps is not unique, but we can be pretty intense on specificity that's needed because of such a different mission in compared to our sister services. Cloud makes that no different, whether we are talking from a perspective of business operations within the Pentagon or warfighting and business operations in the fleet. Yes, I said business operations in the fleet. Absolutely. It does not stop. There's a rumor and often referred to is Marine Corps has, one network. And that's pretty much what it is for us. We're accessing all of our services from one network. That's the Marine Corps Enterprise Network. Industry and our partners and the attendees probably know it as the MCN. So it's the Marine Corps Enterprise Network. And when you talk about cloud, I think we like to say we accelerated to the cloud. We accelerated, increased velocity. And COVID had a lot to do with it. But the good story about our acceleration to cloud was 3.5 to 4 years ago, a conversation about our enterprise infrastructure had to occur because our infrastructure was something our Lance Corporals and Marines consistently reminded the leadership that we need to modernize, we need to be ready, we have to get cloud ready. Mandates, absolutely, from congressional mandates to the Department of Defense mandates, 100% move to the cloud. But not so easy if you have an infrastructure that's not ready to get you there. It's kind of like driving down 95 saying you want to go to my favorite place, which is the mall in Potomac Mills. I can't get there if I have no road. Or maybe I can arrive to a place of destination such as the Potomac Mills Mall, but maybe it takes me forever to get there because there's so much traffic. So when you think of the network and everyone's favorite response to the network, which is the circle of death, is what we call it. That spinning wheel trying to get you there. I like to tell people, oh, the computer's just thinking. It's trying to figure out where am I supposed to route you to? Which configuration should I take advantage of so that I can help you arrive to your destination? And that is a very frustrating thing. So the Marine Corps took an approach that was very accelerated, from server builds to changing configurations, capacity planning, performance and load testing, all in a matter of a year. And yes, COVID hit in the midst of enterprise infrastructure modernization. The software focus perspective also came from not just consuming cloud services, but we also had to collapse data centers. Consolidating data centers was also a focus. So at the end of the day, I think the epicenter is cloud, but the many advantages of the Marine Corps transitioning to the cloud in such an accelerated manner is warfighting capabilities at the ready, at the speed of need, data center consolidation, remote working from home. We also like to say teleworking and remote, because sometimes you may not be at home. Right. So what if you're caring for your elderly parent, or what if you have a PCS is occurring and you're in transit? We have all those use cases that we have to consider. So zero trust for us, easy peasy. We're like, what, really? Defense in depth with a little bit of conditional access, with a little bit of flow 3, which is let me use my personal computer and, go into a virtual instantiation of the mixin and still be able to access and consume those resources. We could not do that without an acceleration to consume cloud services from a commercial and government perspective. I hope that
think
answers your question.
it does. There's a lot there. Let me start to walk some of that back and unpack it a little bit.
Okay.
I think the CARES Act and all the influx of money that came during the start of COVID really was a game changer for DoD writ large, just in terms of investment in transport. From everything you just said, it sounds like that was part of it for the Marine Corps, but a lot of your infrastructure improvements had been ongoing even prior to those new investments. Can you give us a little bit of color on the degree to which that new influx of money really mattered to the Marine Corps?
So the enterprise infrastructure modernization, you hear it referred to as EIM, part of the NGEN contract, was one of the programs that was 97% funded. Unheard of in most cases when you're talking about such an enterprise approach. So we were better lucky than good there. But the CARES Act came into play as very critical, because it's great to have an infrastructure, and now you have a modernized infrastructure. But the things that were not funded was the actual transition, the actual ability to now, after you have upgraded circuit switches and routers for capacity and load, now it's time to turn on the consumption of services. So decommissioning outdated technology. We had B1s and B2s, so those were boundaries. You already know about boundaryless networks, right? At zero trust. So the ability to transition was a gap for us. And to be totally honest with you, I was at Mar 4 Cyber at that time. And it was a conversation that the DCI at that time, Lieutenant General Reynolds, consistently called attention to. And in the Marine Corps, it's called an MROC, the Resources Oversight Committee. And those are decision makers on how we manage our resources. And that was something we consistently talked about. After we upgrade our networks, how are we going to get to the point where we can shut these data centers down? We have to be able to transition to cloud. And transition is something, I'll tell you, it's a conversation that we don't have a lot about. Most times we go from current state to future state. Rarely do you hear anyone talk about steady state, because steady state is one of the most costly phases of your deployment or release plan. And so taking advantage of the CARES Act did a lot of things for us. It allowed us to fund transition. That means we had some of the Marine Corps still using on-premises and consuming services within the Marine Corps data centers, or the Kansas City IT Center. That's probably what everyone's familiar with. But at the same time, in parallel, we had a great Lieutenant Colonel Joni On, now Lieutenant Colonel Joni On. She was major then. She led our agile approach with, I think we had 14 release plans going all at one time, because we had that many commands that were standing up saying, hey, we want to go, we want to accelerate and move into the cloud. So some people were still consuming on-premises services. Some people were consuming Teams, because that was the first approach. We enabled Teams, we enabled OneDrive, and then we started moving mailboxes. Because the good part about that design is transparent to the user. You don't really know something changed until you go into your system properties and you say, oh, I no longer have a restriction on my mailbox. I have all these gigabytes of availability. And so we took an agile approach. We could not have done that without the CARES Act, and being able to have Tiger teams in the midst of COVID, spinning up teams as a capability to be able to communicate to our Marines all the way out in Okinawa, Japan, for example, or Hawaii. One of our first areas that we focused on was our OneMEF team out in California. Sitting here in Maryland, that would not have been possible without the CARES Act, and being able to take advantage of adding money to contracts that were in place. You know, the contracts were there, but the funding wasn't there. We still had the need, we still had the capability, but we did not know where are we going to fund the actual transition. And so we, as you think about that, during our transition planning, we had a 2.5 to 3 year plan, right? And COVID did not allow us to say, we can still keep the 2.5 years to 3 years. We can wait to go back, you know, until the next tranche of funding. So CARES Act for me, I would say, was just in time.
want to stick with the network piece for just another second here because it is so critical to the cloud conversation. I think historically, and the Marine Corps is not alone here, there's been sort of a divide between what we would think of as the business networks and the mission networks or the tactical networks. You mentioned earlier you're now one network. Is that like literally true at this point? How far down the road are you toward that consolidation?
So we have, if my memory serves me correctly, there are 6 domains that are left purposely that we have given exemptions. And I'm the subject matter expert because I signed those exemptions when I was at Mar for Cyber. And the then Major General Glavy, who's now Lieutenant General Glavy, he's the DCI, he endorsed that recommendation and signature of exemptions for our TCOM networks, our educational networks. There are some certain things, some training, those .edu domains, some of those commercial entities. It's about 6 or 7 out there, but we started out at 66, 67, 69 of them. So domain consolidation and elimination was critical to us being able to say it's one network. Now let's talk about the tactical piece. You talked about that. So when our Marines are in either training exercises or in a deployed degraded environment, they do not spin up another brand new network. Okay, so this is a moment of education. It's not another network. They're sub networks. They are subbed to the mix-in. There's tactical entry points. There are enterprise infrastructure that the tactical systems are still taking advantage of from an infrastructure, security. Those services are still being used. So that is why you can say it is one network. We don't have canes. We don't have OneNet, and we don't have NMCI. It is just the mix-in. It's the only thing we got.
Got it. Let's talk a bit about actual system migrations to the cloud. And I want to start this piece by talking about the Marine Corps' actual approach to doing this. And the way I've heard it described recently is that there is essentially I think what you guys call a task force that helps system owners migrate. And that I think the design is to include all the folks who could otherwise be in a position to say no or be blockers. Can you talk a bit about how that general approach works in the Marine Corps?
So everything in the Marine Corps happens by lieutenant colonels, lance corporals, majors, captains, you name it. They are empowered to problem solve. You hear a lot about task forces because this is a warfighting institution, right? So the task force approach came from how do we empower boots on the ground, those who are closest to the network, those who know the network best, empower them to make decisions, but still provide guidance, leadership, and like you said, someone to remove blockers. In the military, no one is unfamiliar with, this person outranks that person. And so you're very hierarchical, very driven by that hierarchy of authority. So of course, we stood up a task force. It was the idea of a couple majors from an agile approach. And they were just sick and tired of telling leaders how slow and how long things took. So you pull a task force team together right now. We started out with Task Force Phoenix. Now there is Task Force Network Modernization. So that's the task force that's getting after what we call net mod. So Task Force Net Mod has task groups up under it. One is the demix-in, deployed mix-in, those services that I talked to you about earlier in a degraded environment. The second one is Cloud Enterprise. That's what we're talking about. There's another task group. Continual service improvement will be one of them because we want to take a look at how the task force is doing and what are those areas that we have to improve. And another high priority in parallel to all of those task groups is talent management and how we can use an automated approach to manage our talent, recruit, retain, retrain, manage our civilian and active duty workforce as well as our reserves, and put those opportunities. So those task groups that I just named you are the top 5 task groups with a task force led by the 3-star general, who's delegated that authority to General Matos, who's the director of C4. I'm his assistant. And we have a colonel and a lieutenant colonel who's going to be, driving and pushing, but the authority is within those task groups, and those are led by majors and captains.
And what has that structure allowed you to do, or even migrations that predate that structure? Can you talk a bit about some of the successes that you've had so far in actually completing migrations to the cloud? Office 365 is obviously a big one, but feel free to add any other examples here too.
So I think the success story there is pace and transparency. Lots of decision making occurs within other divisions and other areas of the Marine Corps that's affected by the services we provide within IT, that infrastructure, that platform, and the security piece. And everyone has a mission. Installation and logistics, they have a mission, but they still need to consume services. They have to still be a part of our transition to the cloud because they're application owners. They are mailbox owners. They're actually end users within the Marine Corps. So they're consuming the IT services. The task force approach gives transparency to the other 3 stars who are also making decisions based on their particular mission set. And then it allows the 3 stars to give leadership to their 1 stars and colonels, et cetera, who's pushing out prioritization. And that transparency and prioritization, it gives you an opportunity to be laser focused on achieving the mission. You mentioned O365. That was a mission. O365 was about enabling teams so that we can all communicate in a more sophisticated manner, adding transparency, but also taking advantage of features that we spent a lot of money on. So we don't want to not use the features that are available. Yes, change is hard and adopting is hard, but we got through it with a lot of training. We spent a lot of time with our partners, not just Microsoft, but taking advantage of the many training models out there and making sure we had instructional videos as well as instructional documents. So the adoption, I would say, went really well. But then we also had SharePoint Online. So SharePoint Online, we had tons of forums all over the place, Kansas City IT Center, down at Camp Lejeune, all the different data centers that the Marine Corps has local to the bases. That was also part of SharePoint Online. That was Velocity. So the task force approach has cross-functional teams. Those team members are majors and enlisted Marines and civilians from every stakeholder that you can think of. So there's no longer a silo of saying, well, I don't know what IT is doing. I don't know what C4 is doing. I don't know what Mar4 Cyber is doing. The conversation started to be, who's the point of contact for Task Force Phoenix? Who's the point of contact for Task Force NetMod? If you're an INL, and then that major or that captain or that sergeant or lance corporal, or even a Marine Corps civilian would say, oh, that's me. Here's what's happening. Here's the notes. Here's what we're doing. Here's the pace that we're keeping. Here's the timeline, because we don't do schedules. We give timelines, very event driven, not based on schedule and budget. We don't, so the task force allows you to adopt an agile mindset and the ability to fund in that manner. And to be totally honest with you, the ability to incrementally deliver value was more effective than waiting until everything is ready years and years later, only to find out, well, now that technology is outdated and industry's created something new. And so how do we continue to adopt? So that's the task force model that allows us to do that.
Just to stick with Office 365 for a second, can you talk a bit more about how that's changed or improved mission effectiveness throughout the organization? I mean, it used to be, I think, that in the bad old days before you really could say that you have one network, you had a different email address when you deployed. I mean, that's not necessarily just part of the Office 365 transition, but how have actual on the ground impacts to Marines come about through migrations like this?
So migrations like this allowed us to consolidate identities and federate. So you just talked about having multiple identities. That's a large headache. You go from one team to another team and you have a totally different email address, but you need what you talked about or notes that you had or some type of meeting that was really important 5 months ago before you transition. So it allowed us to do identity and access management before the zero trust mandates of credentialing and access management occurred. So we had to have a different conversation about identity because you could no longer have multiple identities. Microsoft restricts you from doing so. So we had to have that conversation, and we had to have that statistical design as well as a technical design, and saying, how are we going to federate? We had to make sure our certificates were in place. So there was that PKI. We improved there with PKI and certificates for our CAT cards. And then the capability for the mailbox and storage capacity was very important. I mean, having general officers who receive emails and then there's a response that says this person can't receive emails, their inbox is exceeded. Well, now we're affecting readiness. Okay. And so the ability to increase capacity with O365 mailbox was very valuable. What we haven't talked about is our McTissa team out in California, who's doing the hard work now to work with Microsoft to consume cloud services in a degraded environment. Now, that's what's going to break the mold. Being able to consume cloud services in a secure manner when a Marine is deployed, whether that's aboard ship, whether that's on the ground in the Philippines, or any other place where there's either conflict or competition. That is what our teams are really working on. And so the ability to know what right looks like here in the headquarters Marine Corps area and at our base posts and stations gives us a baseline target space to design that DDIL environment.
We're talking with Renata Spinks. She's the Marine Corps Senior Information Security Officer and the Assistant Director for C4. She's back with us later on today as we continue our conversation on the DoD Cloud Exchange. We're going to have part 2 of our discussion after we get an industry perspective. Let's send you back right now to the studio for more on the DoD Cloud Exchange.